number 75, part
Part
3. It'll be Peggy, who's behind the camera.
I know, and this topic, I was surprised. I didn't know about it until I got here today, what the topic was going to be. This is going to be hard.
But she told me a bit about it. It's very, it's crazy that I never heard about this.
I have. I've known about
I
this.
never heard about it either until my sister recommended this book to me.
What is it?
It's by Claire Keegan. She wrote Foster.
I read Foster,
and
Yeah, I love Foster.
she has a new one out, which I
Yes,
just
she
bought for
does.
my sister, but I can't remember the name of it. And it's by Claire Keegan. Her books are lovely, and
Yes.
she's an Irish author,
She's very
and all of her
talented.
books take place in Ireland.
Yes.
So when I was reading this book, it's really about a man, head of the household of his family in a town in Ireland, and he owns a company where he delivers coal and firewood to all the local towns. And in the town, there is a convent, and that's when I learned about the Magdalene Laundries in Ireland, and they were all over Ireland. There was hundreds of them, and they were in business for like 231 years,
Yes.
and people just turned a blind eye to them, what was going on in those places. So yeah, I'm going to read some things. It's been very disturbing for me and stressful for me to read about this.
Yeah.
And I watched a couple of documentaries also. You could see documentaries on it. There are several movies made about it.
Where did you see the documentaries? Because
Well, one of them is the BBC one I watched this
okay.
morning. And that was a really, really good one. And they actually interview survivors,
Oh, wow.
you know, or children of people, because the children, they gave away people's children in these places too. They were the mother-baby homes, they called them. But anyway, I found this article here because I could have gone down the rabbit hole with this. There's so much out there. So I just went on history.com because usually they're pretty succinct. And I don't have to, you know, go a lot of places. This is the base of it. And if you're interested, it's heartbreaking, but it's very interesting, and like the Catholic Church still has not acknowledged anything.
Nope.
You know, they're
Wow.
yep, they withhold information. Well, we'll get to that part anyway. But anyway, this article is called "How Ireland Turned Fallen Women into Slaves."
I love how it says fallen women.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah, fallen women is in quotes, because some of these girls, one girl from one of the movies that I watched last night, they took 4 real stories, and the movie kind of revolved around those 4 lives. At the end of the movie, they told you what happened to these women,
Oh, okay.
and they weren't even women; they were girls. They were young girls.
And remember, Ireland, when this was going on, they didn't allow, there's no abortions, right? So fallen.
Yeah.
Because, you
Right,
know, there's
right.
no way for, and we
Right.
talked about abortion last topic
yeah,
too, so
I know.
it's very timely.
I know. So anyway, until 1996, that's when the last one closed.
Oh my God.
1996. And these laundries started in the 1700s.
Yes.
Now, when you say laundries, I guess you're going to explain.
Yes.
Yeah, they actually were laundries, but I will
Laundries,
explain.
Oh, they okay.
Okay. Until 1996, pregnant or promiscuous women could be incarcerated for life in the Magdalene Laundries.
But what happened to the guys that got these
Nothing.
women pregnant? Nothing.
Nothing.
Who do you
Absolutely
think makes the
nothing.
laws?
You know.
Who do
Exactly.
you think makes the laws?
So when the Sisters of Our Lady of Charity, so ironic,
Oh, yes. What a nice name.
decided to sell some land they owned in Dublin, Ireland, to pay their debts in 1992, the nuns followed the proper procedures. They petitioned officials for permission to move the bodies of women buried in the cemetery at their Donnybrook laundry, which between 1837 and 1992 served as a workhouse and home for fallen women. But the cemetery at Donnybrook was no ordinary resting place. It was a mass grave. Inside were the bodies of scores of unknown women. the undocumented, uncared about inmates of one of Ireland's notorious Magdalene Laundries. Their lives and later their deaths have been shrouded in secrecy. For more than 2 centuries, women in Ireland were sent to institutions like Donnybrook as a punishment for having sex outside of marriage. Unwed mothers, flirtatious women, and others deemed unfit for society were forced to labor under the strict supervision of nuns for months or years, sometimes even for life. Many of these women were there for their whole lives. I guess after a while, like, where do you go?
Right.
You know, like,
Yeah.
Well, we're assuming these are long lives, which they likely were not long lives.
well, some of them were
Some of them
long
were,
lives.
but
They were. They
but
just,
I do
they
know some of
adapted
them
to
were,
life
though.
there.
Somewhere.
And
Yeah.
when the mass grave of Donnybrook was discovered, the 155 unmarked tombs touched off a scandal that exposed the extent and horrors of the Magdalene Laundries. As women came forward to share their experiences of being held against their will in restrictive workhouses, the Irish public reacted with outrage. All through the history of these places, the Irish public kind of ignored it because the Catholic Church has so much power in Ireland, and they were very closely linked with the Irish government, that the Irish government was actually paying them to run these laundries.
Yes.
Parents were sending their
Yes.
children there.
Yes.
Parents.
What?
You have to watch some of these documentaries and watch the movie,
I have.
the Magdalene Sisters.
Yeah. Yeah.
Magdalene Sisters.
Yeah. It's very.
When the
disturbing.
Magdalene movement first took hold in the mid-18th century, in the United States it started in the 17th. And no, the 18th century is the 1700s.
Okay.
There was one in New York and there was one in Philadelphia. I didn't even read about them.
Right. I didn't know that, but I'm not surprised.
They're in Canada also,
Yeah.
and in England. When the Magdalene movement first took hold in the mid-18th century, the campaign to put fallen women to work was supported by both the Catholic and Protestant churches, with women serving short terms inside the asylums with the goal of rehabilitation. Over the years, however, the Magdalene Laundries, named for the biblical figure Mary Magdalene, became primarily Catholic institutions, and the stints grew longer and longer. Women sent there were often charged with redeeming themselves through lace-making, needlework, or doing laundry. So why do you think that the stints grew longer and longer?
Because they were doing.
Because they were making money.
They were making money hand over fist. They were getting money from Guinness used to support them.
Yeah.
Guinness. The Irish government, all different departments, the Department of Agriculture, all these different Irish agencies, state agencies, decided not to send their laundry out to commercial laundries anymore.
It was cheaper for them.
It was cheaper for them to send them, and because they were using slave labor.
Yeah.
So they could afford to do it at a cheaper rate.
This is why I say it's easier for me to believe in a demon than it is to believe in a kind God.
Though most residents had not been convicted of any crime, conditions inside were prison-like. They were actually locked in the dormitories. The lock was on the outside. They were not allowed to talk. No one was allowed to talk. They beat you. They would beat you half to death if you talked. I guess the reason they did that is they didn't want these girls communing with each other. And if they did talk to each other, they were whispering
and
at
learning
night.
what was happening.
Exactly.
It was about control. It was all about
Exactly.
control.
Yeah.
Redemption might sometimes involve a variety of coercive measures, including shaven heads, institutional uniforms, bread and water diets, restricted visiting, supervised correspondence, solitary confinement, and even flogging. Ireland's first such institution, the Magdalene Asylum for Penitent Females in Dublin, was founded by the Protestant Church of Ireland in 1765. At the time, there was a worry that prostitution in Irish cities was on the rise, and that wayward women who had been seduced, had sex outside of marriage, or gotten pregnant out of wedlock were susceptible to becoming prostitutes.
No, they don't say incest or rape there.
Mm-hmm.
Because,
Oh.
you know, that would implicate the man.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right, well, it takes, I understand why you've been disturbed. I really, it's.
It goes back to like the Catholic Church promoting why women want abortions because they're so concerned with vanity. They're the ones doing it all to themselves,
Yeah.
right?
Well, one of the stories in the, not from a documentary, but in the movie that I watched, which they based it on 4 real stories, were incorporated into that movie. The young girl was at a family wedding, and she was sitting next to her cousin, a male cousin, and they were joking and laughing with each other, and then he got up during the ceremony, and because it wasn't like in a big church or anything, and he went like in the back of the room and opened up a door and was going like this to her. So she went over and she went in the room, and he was trying to kiss her. So like she pushed him away against the wall, and like she read him the riot act, and then he left because she said, "I will tell on you." And then he left the room, and she just took a breath for a minute, and then she went to open the door, and as soon as she went to open the door, it opened out. He slammed it into her head and pushed her up, and he raped her. So now she's very upset. And she goes out back to the wedding, and she was sitting next to her female, I don't know if it was her cousin or who it was, another young girl, her age, and she was crying, and you don't hear the words because there's music playing, and she's whispering to her, and she's crying, and the cousin, you know, gets up, and then she goes to tell her father goes to tell the girl's father, and you see the way the girl's father looks at her, and she just starts crying because you know what's going to happen to her. It was her fault.
Yeah.
And the mother just sits there stony faced, never comforted her.
Right, right.
And in the movie, the girl went home that night, went to sleep, and early in the morning, the father wakes her up, say, "Come with me." And they put her in a car with the priest. They called the priest was all involved in it, and they took her away. And her younger brother, they all shared the same room, was saying, "Where are you taking Margaret? Where are you taking Margaret?" And no one would answer him. And at the end of the movie, it was, you know, he came back into the picture. It was very well done. But, you know, it was her fault. Somebody raped her. Nobody asked her what happened.
We see that in some Indian cultures.
Yeah.
We see that in African cultures still. You know, it's if you're raped.
Middle Eastern.
Out of Middle Eastern, right? You know, some Asian cultures as well. You know, you see this.
It happens here.
It happens here.
That's why a lot of women don't want to say that
That's
they were
why
raped,
it's so
because they become
underreported.
you know,
In many of those cultures, their own siblings will murder them because they have
in the Middle
embarrassed the
East,
family.
it's a
This is
disgrace.
a scene. I mean, it comes right out of Angela's Ashes.
Yeah,
Remember the mother with the cousin, you know, and it was like, oh no, but it happened.
I know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh well. So anyway, let's see. Initially, a majority of women entered the institutions voluntarily and served out multi-year terms in which they learned a respectable profession.
Yeah.
The idea was that they'd employ these skills to earn money after being released. Their work supported the institution while they were there. But over time, the institutions became more like prisons. Many with different groups of women being routed through the system, sometimes by the Irish government. There were inmates imported from psychiatric institutions and jails, women with special needs, victims of rape and sexual assault, pregnant teenagers sent there by their parents, and girls deemed too flirtatious or tempting to men.
So the men have no responsibility.
No.
None whatsoever.
They're too tempting.
When
for
I
them.
was watching that movie at the end, I said, I want to know, because I know that was a real case that they based that girl on from the wedding. I want to know what happened to her freaking cousin. He just lived his life happily ever after.
Yeah.
And she was there for 4 years before she actually escaped.
Oh, okay.
Peggy, nothing
It's
happened
such a
to
good-
him. Nothing. Look at that guy, the Comstockery. he thought too tempting. It was, he couldn't stop masturbating because women
Right.
were too tempted.
Exactly.
And then he became
Exactly.
like postmaster, this person in the
I know.
post office,
I
with
know.
power and laws.
I know.
I mean, come on.
Though the institutions were run by Catholic orders, they were supported by the Irish government, which funneled money towards the system in exchange for laundry services. And these girls weren't getting paid. And they weren't eating what the nuns were eating in there. The nuns were having these big feasts right there. And these girls were eating gruel, or sometimes they just had bread and they could dip it in like broth, I guess. They worked 10 hours a day in these horrible laundries where they were scrubbing clothes and
Raw.
yeah, their hands were raw and they were exhausted, and most
And
of
it's
them
cold and the weather is awful.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes.
was horrible. Nuns ruled the laundries with impunity, sometimes beating inmates and enforcing strict rules of silence. You didn't know when the next beating was going to come, said a survivor, Mary Smith, in an oral history. Smith was incarcerated in the Sunday's Well Laundry in Cork after being raped. Nuns told her it was in case she got pregnant. Once there, she was forced to cut her hair and take on a new name. That's another thing. They took their names away because they wanted to take their identity away.
Yeah.
She was not allowed to talk and was assigned backbreaking work in the laundry, where nuns regularly beat her for minor infractions and forced her to sleep in the cold. Due to the trauma she suffered, Smith doesn't remember exactly how long she spent in the Sunday's Well. To me, it felt like my lifetime, she said. Smith wasn't alone. Often women's names were stripped from them. They were referred to by numbers or as child or penitent. Some inmates, often orphans or victims of rape or abuse, stayed there for a lifetime. Others escaped and were brought back to the institutions. In one case, in this movie that I saw, and it was one of the real people that they did it, the girl did escape. She was begging to go back home, and she did manage to escape, and she got home, and her father brought her back and said, "Don't you ever show your face again." And he was beating her in front of the nuns in her bed. He threw her back in the dormitory in her bed. And then the nuns shaved her hair, and she was all bloodied from beatings. But she was the one, who, she wasn't even pregnant. She was just flirting.
Oh, well, then she deserved it, And what's their idea of flirting? Like,
Smiling.
Yeah, like
whatever,
flirting with boys and
Yeah, no,
being
but-
attractive,
But
and
what's their, but even if you're just
you might
conversing-
become a prostitute.
But
It
Carol.
doesn't matter if she was flirting
but
or
their
not.
idea of flirting, what I'm saying is like, it may not even be flirting. It may be just communicating.
Teenagers, and she was a teenager.
Yeah, just
like
talking.
yeah.
Talking to somebody.
Another survivor, Marina Gambold, was placed in a laundry by her local priest. He was probably doing stuff. Yeah. She recalls being forced to eat off the floor after breaking a cup and getting locked outside in the cold for a minor infraction. I was working in the laundry from 8 in the morning until about 6 in the evening, she told the BBC in 2013. I was starving with the hunger. I was given bread and drippings, for my breakfast. One of the things that I found from the documentary is one woman was in an orphanage because her mother went to one of the mother-baby places where, you gave birth and then they took your baby and forced
you
adoption.
to adopt, yeah.
And she said that she was in this orphanage. They put her in an orphanage, and she would, they were half starved in the orphanage too. And it was in an apple orchard, and she found an apple and took the apple, and the nuns beat her for stealing the apple, and then they put her in a laundry for that.
Just like Eve.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Some pregnant women were transferred to homes for unwed mothers, where they bore and temporarily lived with their babies and worked in conditions similar to those of the laundries. Babies were usually taken from their mothers and handed over to other families. In one of the most notorious homes, the Bond Secures Mother and Baby Home in Tuam, scores of babies died. In 2014, remains of at least 796 babies were found in a septic tank that was buried in the yard of the home.
Yes.
The facility is being investigated to reconstruct the story of what happened. And the problem with getting like the real history and the real facts is that the Catholic Church will not release the documents.
Yeah.
Were all of these places run by nuns?
Yes, they were all run by nuns.
And were any of
And
these
priests.
women raped in prison?
Yes.
Well, the priests were involved too, and one of the cases in the movie, which was another true one, the girl actually died when she was 24 years old.
I remember that one vividly.
One of her friends, the friend that escaped, found out that the priest called her into a room, this girl, and she was a little off. She didn't have Down syndrome or anything, but she was a little bit
slower
off.
mentally.
And she had a baby out of wedlock. They took her baby away, but her sister ended up with her baby, and she was never allowed to see. Her sister wasn't allowed to visit, could never see the baby, but her sister used to sneak to the gate where they used to hang the laundry. So
I remember that.
And she had the necklace, the St.
Yes.
Christopher necklace, and she said, "This is my telephone." And they would just hold up the necklaces to each other with her little boy, and he would just wave to her. Well, that woman, the priest called her into a room one day, and this other girl saw through a window that he was making her have oral sex with him.
And he had sexually transmitted disease, and these girls got it as well.
Yep. Oh, God almighty. That girl died of anorexia when she was 24 in an asylum because she told...
She was crazy, right?
Well, they said she was crazy because she started screaming. There was a ceremony, and she started screaming, "You're not a man of God!
Yes.
You're not a man of God!" And the nuns couldn't shut her up. And the next day they put her in an asylum, and that's where she died. And she just really lost it there.
Don't forget also, she could have had untreated syphilis.
Yeah.
Which which a lot of people have.
Didn't you do another podcast where you mentioned that women were put into institutions because their husband had no use for them?
That was the book that she read.
It was, The Woman Who Could Not Be
Silent. That book is excellent, Lisa.
It's
you should see if you can find it on tape.
You will read it. It
reads like a novel,
and it's thick, but it goes like this. It's so quick.
It sounds like the same premise.
It was all the same time period. Yeah.
In that.
Well, that's what they're trying to do now.
We're going backwards.
Exactly. A lot of the things you say is
which is why we're talking about this to remind us of our history. This is our history.
It is in our history.
And it just. You don't want to know about this, but you have to know about it. Yeah, it's just.
I don't know that they can put this genie back in the bottle anymore.
Oh, they're trying.
They try, but I don't think they can.
I don't know. They got the power. They have the Supreme Court.
They're doing
it
in Arizona, and then all their Congress went on break.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so how did such an abusive system endure for 231 years in Ireland? To start with, any talk of harsh treatment at the Magdalene Laundries and mothers' homes tended to be dismissed by the public since the institutions were run by religious orders.
Of course.
Okay, survivors who told others what they had been through were often shamed or ignored. Other women were too embarrassed to talk about their past and never told anyone about their experiences. Details on both the inmates and their lives are scant. So one woman from the documentary, she was elderly, and she said, in the documentary, she said, "This is the first time I'm telling anybody about this. I was married to my husband, who had just passed, for 38 years, and I never told him." Wow. Well, it's like a lot of people, a lot of women who are raped never tell anyone.
I believe that.
Estimates of the number of women who went through the Irish Magdalene Laundries vary, and most religious orders have refused to provide archival information for investigators and historians. Up to 300,000 women are thought to have passed through the laundries in total, at least 10,000 of them since 1922. But despite a large number of survivors, the laundries went unchallenged until the 1990s. Then the Sisters of Our Lady of Charity decided to sell some of its land in 1992. They applied to have 133 bodies moved from unmarked graves on the property, but the remains of 155 people were found. They were found by the gravedigger. They hired a gravedigger, and he went to them. He said, "There's a lot more people under here than you're telling me that are." Right. And he was getting paid by the grave.
Oh, there you are.
When journalists learned that only 75 death certificates existed for these 155.
Which is why we need journalists.
Startled community members cried out for more information. The nuns explained there had been an administrative error, cremated all of the remains, and reburied them in another mass grave.
Cremated, so you can't now because DNA exists now.
It's even sadder that these nuns are women. Why do you do that to other women? It makes no sense to me.
And they're women of God,
That's the
sisters of charity.
Yeah. Talk about.
That's what we talked about was don't be fooled with the name. Remember what I talked about the topic with education? We use these good names, but it's
I know.
Don't get fooled by names.
The discovery turned the Magdalene Laundries from an open secret to front page news. So everybody really knew about it. And this book here, this one man who discovered, because he had to deliver on Christmas Eve some coal and nobody answered the door at the convent or whatever it was, the home. And he opens up the cellar door to do it, and there was a young lady there in the freezing cold, barely clothed, no shoes, totally emaciated, head shaved, starved to death, saying, "Please take me to the river and drown me."
Oh my God.
And he didn't. He left. But he ended up in the end of the book.
Oh, yeah, don't tell me, because I'll read it.
Oh my God. Okay. What was I up to? Okay. The discovery turned the Magdalene to front page news. Suddenly, women began to testify about their experiences at the institutions and to pressure the Irish government to hold the Catholic Church accountable and to pursue cases with the United Nations for human rights violations. Soon the UN urged the Vatican to look into the matter, stating that girls at the laundries were deprived of their identity, of education, and often of food and essential medicines, and were imposed with an obligation of silence and prohibited from having any contact with the outside world. The UN did get involved in this whole thing. And then the Irish government eventually said, okay, like the report that this senator came out with, it was very vague. Like he never really admitted that the Catholic Church did the most horrible things to these women, but he did say, "Oh, we apologize that this happened, and they're going to give money to these people." But nobody ever made the Catholic Church. They said that particular one was worth $1.5 billion from the money that they made, and they don't pay a nickel towards compensating these people, and the government will not make them do it. As the Catholic Church remained silent, the Irish government released a report that acknowledged extensive government involvement in the laundries and the deep cruelty of the institutions. In 2013, Ireland's president apologized to the Magdalene women and announced a compensation fund. Due in part to the uproar surrounding the discovery of the mass grave, the last Magdalene Laundry finally closed in 1996. Known as the Gloucester Street Laundry, it was home to 40 women, most of them elderly and many with developmental disabilities. 9 had no known relatives. All decided to stay with the nuns. Although Smith managed to reclaim her own life, she understands the damage that long-term institutionalization can inflict. "My body went into shell shock when I went there. When the door closed, my life was over, Smith recalled in her oral history. You see all these women there and you know you're going to end up like them and be psychologically damaged for the rest of your life. You have to watch the documentary. I mean, they're on YouTube.
Yeah.
They're all on YouTube. You could just put in Magdalene Laundries and there's so much information. And it really is despicable that happened and went on for so long.
So what can we do to make the Catholic Church, like, own up to this thing? What seriously, like I was saying, we need to write letters, we need to do, I mean, this is something.
Well, these women are all organized. I mean, they are knocking on doors of convents. They're not being let in.
Right.
You know, they're behind locked gates,
Right.
you know, the Catholic Church.
Right.
And, you know, one woman went to one of them with a BBC reporter. This is from the documentary. And the woman who answered wasn't a nun, like she worked there. No. You already have your answer. The answer is no. We're not going to let you in. We're not going to talk to you. And the woman who was the victim said, all I want is for someone to apologize to me for what happened.
Right.
And the woman said, no, I'm sorry. You know, I just work here.
It's way too many people have no cojones. They really just don't defend what's right.
But it's the reason why the Catholic Church is struggling so much as well. They don't have as much of a hold as they used to, especially
well,
in
because
that
of all the
country.
sexual abuse, you know,
which was part of that as well with the
It sure
Magdalene
was,
Laundries. And but I mean, so this is hurting them.
Yeah.
And maybe that's because where do you hurt them the most? In their pocketbook. I mean,
Yep.
every year you hear more churches are closing, more Catholic schools are closing, and yet they stand by their little principles. And sometimes they tweak them a little bit, not enough. We're still one of the last religions, I think, that don't let women. Even hold positions of power.
No, there's a lot of
some of the
Protestants don't. But I mean, like, you know, there's a lot of them do.
Yeah,
you know, and
but probably in the Hindus and stuff, I don't think they do.
Maybe you're right. But even in Jewish religion, you can. You know, and it's.
Yeah.
They're gonna lose. It's one of the main reasons I left the Catholic Church, and I don't regret it.
Yeah.
I'll make that. Yeah. I'm making that very clear. You know, and I wouldn't go back.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't either.
Yeah.
One of the women from the documentary. She was, telling the interviewer, she said that she did escape. She got out and she escaped and she made it into town. And in town was the church. And she went to the priest and he raped her.
Yeah.
He raped her and he said,
he knew
I'm giving you 6 pence. And now this is between you and me and you're not ever to tell anybody. He gave her 6 pence, then called the guard and they sent her back.
And then go to confession and confess your sins, and I'll forgive you.
Have you ever heard of this story? Because I had never heard about this. Had you, Lisa?
No, I haven't.
I never heard, and it just shows you that once again something about in our history that we just aren't told. We just And when you told me initially about, oh, Carol, this is so disturbing, and you told me you were going to do this, and I was like, I never heard about this.
I hate that they call her Magdalene because she's,
I know.
That name has been, that character has been so, misrepresented.
Right. My next discussion
Let me see.
is going to be America's forgotten mass imprisonment of women believed to be sexually immoral.
Well, that's going to be part of my next topic because I'll be doing the topic in our next.
But anyway, you should really read this book. It's a wonderful little story. It takes place at Christmas time, and it's kind of like it's a heartwarming too.
She's a very talented writer.
Oh my gosh, I love her.
I mean, it's a very slim
you
novel.
sit down in an afternoon, you read it in like an hour or two.
Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan.
Right.
So I hope that you found this of interest. It's very disturbing, but sometimes we have to face it. So thank you, Peggy.
Thanks.
That
was
very
interesting. Appreciate it.
So that was number 75.
And we're wrapped up.
Yeah, look at that.
Thank you. See you next time, everybody. Bye-bye.
Yes, bye.